Good afternoon. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Grovana Key West. This watch is available from grovana.ch for 809 Swiss francs or 870 US dollars or 870 euro. Grovana have a rich brand heritage. They were founded in 1924 in Tenneken in Switzerland. So you'll notice the similarity between this Key West and the Steinhardt Ocean 142. The reason for that is Grovana used to make the Ocean 1 for Steinhardt, and then later Steinhardt switched to using Palladium AG in Lis in Switzerland to produce their watches. So firstly, let's look at the box that the watch comes in, and then I'll talk you through the specifications of the piece. So the watch comes in a watch box which is housed inside this white cardboard outer box. One removes the lid, which is a snug fit, pulls down the flap, and inside we have the watch box, so I'll take it out and show it to you. So the watch box is white vinyl coated to a good standard, stitched around the perimeter, and we have the Grovana emblem and Grovana text logo in contrasting silver, and it also says Swiss made since 1924. Spring-loaded hinge lid. The interior is fully upholstered with white vinyl to a good standard, and in the right of the base we have a cutout which houses the padded pillow cushion, which is also vinyl coated to a good standard. It's got the same shape and profile to a Rolex padded pillow cushion they use in their watch boxes. These are very good design because they are very stiff, but they have nice tension, so they fit from a 6 to an 8-inch bracelet size. Good snug fit in the right hand portion of the base, so good presentation. One immediately gets the impression that the Grovana Key West is a high quality Swiss made piece. So, Grovana very kindly sent me their catalogue, which details their entire current collection. And as you can see on the front cover, it says 100 years because the brand was founded in 1924. And last year, in 2024, they celebrated their 100th anniversary. So, inside the front cover, we have a picture of how their factory in Tenneken looked in 1971. And then on the first page, we have the history of the brand. It details from the foundation in 1924 up until 2024, their 100th anniversary. So gives the different years of different milestones of the brand, and also it's translated into other foreign languages. And as you can see, here we have a picture of how the factory looks in 2025, and I'll show you a larger picture of it in the back. So nice to get the history of the brand because it's a very interesting read. Also details their in-house watchmaking and also every single one of their pieces. So Grovana produce daily wear pieces, dress pieces, GMT pieces, dive pieces such as the Key West, which is clearly an homage to the Submariner date. And they also produce world timer pieces as well, gents and ladies pieces, so a very broad collection as you can see in both gold, bimetal and also stainless steel, and absolutely gorgeous selection of pieces including annual calendar pieces, and we've got dress pieces as well. Now this is the Key West section. As you can see, we've got a large high definition picture of the Key West. So the Key West is clearly a Master Submariner date, and it's available in Hulk versions, bluesy version, and of course we've got the black dial, black bezel version we're going to be looking at. The Key West is also available on rubber straps with a curved end, which is good, and also as an alternative to the Oyster style bracelet we're going to be looking at, the Key West is available on Jubilee style bracelets in a plethora of dial colour options, as you can see. They also do a GMT version, rather like the GMT Master 2, on Oyster style and also Jubilee style bracelets, Pepsi bezel, Sprite bezel, also Kermit bezel versions. And on the next page I'll show you, it's also available in the GMT version, like a GMT Master 2, on the curved end rubber strap and also the Jubilee style bracelet. So a plethora of options really for everyone's taste. And again, they do several daily wear pieces on bracelets and leather straps in a plethora of dial colour options, and also skeletonized and Genta style pieces, as you can see. So really broad collection, very interesting to look through, including the ladies pieces which are jewelled and available in gold and also stainless steel, as you can see. So over 100 years of watchmaking in Tenneken in Switzerland. Also details all the specifications of the materials of the pieces they use. Now On the last page, this is how their current factory looks in Tennecken in Switzerland in 2025, and you can look it up on Google Street View, and it's good to see this 101 years of Swiss watchmaking in Tennecken in Switzerland. So, with regards to the specifications of the piece, the watch clearly looks like the Steinhardt Ocean 142 because, as I've detailed, Grovana used to make the Ocean 142 for Steinhardt. Similar proportions. We have a 42mm case diameter. We have a lug-to-lug measurement of 50.2mm, a thickness of 12.9mm, and a lug width of 22mm. The oyster-style bracelet tapers from 22mm at the lugs down to 20mm at the flip-lock clasp, and as you can see, the flip-lock is signed to a high standard with a Grovana emblem engraved. The flip-lock is mirror polished, and that contrasts with the bracelet finishing to the body of the clasp. Flanks are mirror polished, and we've got 4 micro adjustment holes. Now, I'm going to be critical of the clasp. This kind of flip-lock clasp with light gauge pressed stainless steel was acceptable in the early 2000s, but we're now in 2025. And for example, Steinhardt have updated the clasp they're using on the Ocean 139 and 42 respectively. They're now made by Palladium AG, but they use a heavier gauge of 316L grade stainless steel rather than a pressed stainless steel clasp like this, and it has more micro adjustments, but the other benefit is it's heavier and therefore more aesthetically pleasing. This feels too light and the quality just isn't good enough. Yes, it would have been acceptable in the early 2000s, but not in 2025. Grovana really need to update this to a micro adjustment clasp, or at the very minimum a heavier gauge with 5 or 6 holes in the flanks versus the minimum 4 holes, because it's just not good enough in 2025. We have a flat sapphire crystal with blue tinted AR coating on the underside, and the blue tinted anti-reflective coating does an outstanding job of reducing the glare and the highly reflective nature of the silver mirror polished applied indices and the silver mirror polished Mercedes handset. Now, with regards to the handset and the indices, they should scale up the proportion. Now, I appreciate this is an homage to the Rolex Submariner dates. For example, the indices and the Mercedes handset do look similar proportions to the 16610 Submariner date. That is okay for a 39mm or a 40mm head of the piece, but this is a 42, so the head of the piece has been scaled up from 40 to 42. They should have scaled up the proportion of the indices to maxi dial proportions as per the Rolex maxi dial used in the Submariner date. They also need to scale up the proportions of the Mercedes handset to match the indices. So the indices and the handset, although they do look visually similar to a 16610 Submariner date, for a 42mm they just look slightly undersized. They would look better if they were Rolex maxi dial size, both the Mercedes handset and the indices larger. That would improve the legibility, and it would also look better for a 42mm with a larger dial. The Cyclops magnifier has AR coating, so that's good because it improves the legibility, but it is only 1.5 times magnification, and this is also a negative or a criticism I will level at the Steinhardt Ocean 142. 2.5 times is the industry standard as per Rolex because that is optimum. It enhances the legibility of magnifying the date window by 2.5 times. It's the industry standard for good reason. 1.5 times really is negligible. It does not really improve the legibility. Magnifying the date window by 1.5 is not as good as 2.5. It's a very easy change for Grovana to make. They could update the Cyclops magnifier to 2.5 times very easily without maximising without increasing profit margin massively and therefore reducing their profit margin per piece significantly. A 2.5 times Cyclops does not cost much more than a 1.5 times, so there's no excuse for not using it. On a positive note, the dial is matte black rather than glossy enamel black, and the benefit of that is it reduces the glare and the reflection from the dial, so the legibility is good. The thing I dislike about the dial is the amount of text. There's too much text and information at 6 o'clock. We've got 4 lines. Now, just bear with me. I'm going to move the minute hand out of the way so you can see it better when I'm talking about it. So, we have automatic 25 joules sapphire, 1,000 feet equals 300 meters. Sapphire should be deleted. Sapphire refers to the sapphire crystal. That's a given, but it doesn't refer to the model of the piece because it's the Key West. It's not called the Grovana Sapphire. So it's a given that at this price point, €870, we're not going to be using mineral crystal or K1 hardened mineral glass. So sapphire crystal is the industry standard, so they don't need to print sapphire on the dial. It's obvious that this piece is glazed with sapphire crystal, not mineral crystal. They should delete sapphire. Too much text on the dial, it's too busy, too cluttered. It should simply have automatic 26 joules and 1000 feet equals 300 meters, just the right amount of information for a dive piece. Now, early versions of the Key West had 25 joules on the dial because originally the Key West and also the Ocean 142 were made with the ETA 2824-2, which had 25 joules. This one says 26 joules because it's powered by the SW200-1. Now, that also applied to the Steinhardt Ocean 142, which Grovana used to make. There was a time when the Key West and also the Ocean 142 were made with both movements equally. So there was a 50-50 chance if you got a Key West or an Ocean 142, it could have the ETA 2824-2 or it could have the SW200-1. The reason for that is ETA restricted supply of their movements to non-Swatch Group brands because ETA is owned by the parent company Swatch Group, and they decided to restrict supply and in order to decrease their competition from non-Swatch Group brands. So the problem is the supply of ETA movements dried up for Grovana and of course Steinhardt, and they had to switch over to using the SW200-1, but they've now updated the dial. Used to say 25 joules, now says 26, which is correct because it's SW200 powered versus the earlier versions which were ETA 2824-2 powered. Swiss made, either side of the 6 o'clock index, does look good, and I like the dial layout. It is as per the Rolex Submariner date. So they just need to update the Cyclops magnifier to 2.5 times and delete sapphire to improve it. The bezel insert is aluminium. Now, subjectively, one could be critical of this because it's not as hard and scratch resistant as ceramic, but it does give the piece a vintage aesthetic as per the Rolex Submariner date 16610. I like the metallic finish to the aluminium bezel insert. It is very aesthetically pleasing. 15-minute ticks are high definition. Quality of the anodizing is very good. Arabic numerals are clearly legible. Lume pip is good quality. The bezel itself is solid 316L grade stainless steel, scallop teeth to it as per the Submariner date. They've mirror polished the scallops rather than brush satin finishing them, and it has a nice large mirror polished chamfer to the top edge which deletes the sharp tips to the scalloped teeth. So scallop teeth are grippy and tactile. You can get good purchase with your index finger and thumb, and it's not sharp because they've deleted the tips of the teeth. So they've done a very good job of the finishing to the scalloped bezel. So let's test the bezel execution. Now, the thing that might come as a surprise to you, and it surprised me, is that this does not have a 120 click unidirectional bezel, which is the industry standard. It has a 60 click bezel. So originally dive watches had friction bezels which didn't click. They didn't have a click spring or grooves in the underside to the stainless steel bezel. They simply were friction based because they had a wire which was octagonal shaped, and that provided the friction in a groove. So then friction bezels were updated to 60 click unidirectional bezels, and then 120 click, which you will all be familiar with. So this uses a 60 click bezel rather than a 120 click. I think Grovana should update this. For example, they made the Steinhardt Ocean 142 with a 120 click bezel, and that was very smooth. 60 click feels rougher. The clicks feel heavier, and also they are louder, and you can feel them. They feel heavy, so you can really feel the clicks. The grooves in the stainless steel bezel are deeper than a 120 click bezel. The 60 click grooves are wider and deeper. Now, subjectively, some collectors might like the vintage aesthetic of a 60 click bezel versus a 120 click. I personally prefer the refinement and the smoothness of a 120 click bezel. So I think they should update this to modern day specification. 120 clicks is the industry standard. Now, in terms of the action, it does feel smooth, but not as smooth all the way through the 360 degrees. 120 click bezel has finer clicks, and therefore it feels smoother. This feels rougher in terms of the resistance because each click is heavier, and it feels like there's more friction than one gets with a 120 click bezel. But it does feel even. In terms of resistance all the way through the rotation, it doesn't get tighter or looser through the 360 degrees, but it just doesn't feel as refined and smooth as 120 clicks. No lateral side-to-side play, which is good. No back play, which is good. So they've got the refinement well in terms of the execution of it. Let's just check the alignments. Perfect. The Lume pip and triangle perfectly aligns with the 12 o'clock index on the dial and the 60-minute tick on the chapter ring. So Bezel execution is good, but they just need to enhance it by updating it to modern day specification, 120 clicks versus 60. Let's look at the screw down crown. Solid 316L grade stainless steel crown, coin edge finished, and it has a nice chamfer on it which deletes the sharp tips to the coin edge teeth, correctly proportioned. It's partially recessed inside the crown guards, and they have nice pointed flowing lines. The crown guards does look very similar to the Ocean 142, which used the same case. And it's signed with a Grovana emblem, engraved with high definition engraving, mirror polished cap to it. So let's test the execution. Silky smooth. Sublime screw down crown execution. It feels every bit as smooth as the screw down crown on my Rolex Submariner Date 16610, which has a trip lock crown, which is the very best. So, minimal number of turns required to unscrew it. So when it's fully unscrewed, one can manually wind the Sellita Caliber SW200-1 automatic to its maximum 41-hour power reserve. Now, the one thing that's missing from this piece is it doesn't have an owner's instruction manual. It does have a warranty card, does have a tag, but doesn't have an owner's instruction manual, which I'll show you. Feels smooth as you manually wind it to its maximum 41-hour power reserve. One can feel the tension in the mainspring gradually building up, which is very good. So I like it. Feels good to manually wind the SW200-1. There's no discernible difference between the ETA 2824-2, which it is a clone of, and the SW200-1. Although the former has 25 joules and the latter has 26, the architecture of both movements is the same. They feel exactly the same to manually wind. Putting it out to the first click position is the quick set date complication, and if you look at the date window, you can see it now clicks over with a nice positive click. Nice light clicking action. Feels lighter than the indexing on an NH35A. No discernible difference. Feels exactly the same as an ETA 2824-2. Good solid indexing. The alignment of the Arabic numerals on the date wheel are correct, left and right, and also up and down. They don't look too left or too right or too high or too low. So the alignment is good. The font is nice and crisp and sharp. It's high definition. It's not too thick, but it's just a shame it only has 1.5 times versus 2.5 times magnification, as I've detailed. Putting it out to a second click hacks the movement, so it's possible to hack the SW200-1 and set the time precisely to the second. Nice light resistance to the gearing, minimal backplay, feels nice and robust and solid. Feels nice and smooth. So, minimal backplay. When you rotate the crown clockwise and anti-clockwise, there's an almost immediate response, and it's very good. Feels refined. Pushing it back in, it's got a nice positive click, and that restarts the movement. Let's test screwing the crown back down. Instant thread pickup. Perfect interface between the internal thread of the stainless steel crown and the external thread of the stainless steel crown tube. So, quality control, builds quality, machining and tolerances are all fantastic. This is silky smooth, sublime screw down crown execution. Also correctly proportioned. I like the way it's partially recessed in between the crown guards. The crown doesn't protrude too far from the right hand flank of the case and the crown guards. Now I just want to show you. The watch comes with a plastic warranty card, and on the reverse it's filled in with Grovana Watch Company, Tennecken. We have the reference number of the piece and the date of purchase, and it's covered by a 3-year international warranty. I want to give due credit to Grovana here, because often mid-tier pieces at this price point of €870, they only cover their watches with a 1-year or 2-year warranty. 3 years is exceptional and they deserve credit. And lastly, one also gets this cardboard tag which simply says Grovana, and on the reverse we have the full reference number for the black dial, black bezel version of the Key West. But as I've detailed, the one thing that's absent, and I would like to see Grovana introduce, is an owner's instruction manual with clear, concise diagrams, instructions in English, detailing the operation of the movement used, which is the SW200-1 automatic. It does need an owner's instruction manual at this price point. So let's look at the bracelet and end links in detail. So female pivoted end links, which look very similar to the Ocean 142, but they negate the benefit of female pivoted end links because they don't articulate the same way that on a Black Bay 41, for example. So they could have just used male end links, because you can see the center rectangle in the female pivoted end link is meant to articulate, but we don't get the benefit. For example, the end link in the oyster style bracelet can't pivot. It can't articulate and move underneath the tips of the lugs, which is the whole point of not using male end links. They simply made a mistake, because if you look at the edge of the rectangle in the centre, they haven't removed enough meat, enough metal from the edge of it to allow it to articulate. It catches on the end link, which is a snug fit in between the lugs. They simply need to machine more metal off the left hand side of it, and that would allow it to pivot, because at the moment it can't pivot as per a Black Bay 41 Heritage or a Black Bay 58, for example, which uses similar female pivoted end links. So one doesn't get the benefit, but on a positive note, the tolerances are good. Articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, doesn't have excessive longitudinal, lateral, side to side or up and down play. So the build quality, quality control and machining and tolerances are all good, but it's just a shame they've made a mistake with the machining, because they should have just machined more meat off the edge. Let's check the other side for continuity. Again, articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, so that's good, doesn't have excessive play in any direction, but you can see the actual rectangle here in the centre of the end link. It should be able to move. It can only move 1mm. If they machined 1mm more of metal from the edge off it, or 1mm out of the end link itself, that would allow it to pivot more. And then we get the benefit of the female pivoted end link. The end link of the oyster style bracelet could pivot underneath the tips of the lugs, which is how it's meant to. This does have a long lug to lug measurement of 50.2, and one has to expect that because it's a 42mm, not a 39 or a 40 head of the piece, but 50.2 means it's long. It does have long flat lugs as per the Ocean 142, which used the same case. The problem is it really does need pivoting end links in order to pull the end link of the bracelet snug, because as I'll show you in the wrist shot, it's a characteristic of the straight flat lugs like the Ocean 142. You get this large gap underneath the tips of the lugs, which spoils the feel good factor and the comfort level. Now the bracelet is well finished. Brushed satin finishing has a beautiful luster to it, a nice fine grained finish to it, as you can see, and also on the other side, beautiful luster to it, and that contrasts with the flawless mirror polishing to the flanks. However, the negative of the bracelet is we've got the cost-cutting measure of push pins. It's disappointing to see push pins used as a cost-cutting measure rather than 1.6mm screw pins, because they are the industry standard at this price point in the mid-tier, €870. It has to be screw pins. So to put this into perspective, this watch is clearly similar to the Ocean 142. Now, the Ocean 142 currently retails at €490. This Key West is €870, which is significantly more expensive. But the Ocean 142 at €490 uses screw pins. This is €870, but it uses push pins, which are not as good quality. Grovana really need to update this to screw pins. They are the industry standard at this price point. It is wholly unacceptable to see push pins used. Now, the negative of the push pin bracelet is, as one expects, it rattles, because we've got too much lateral, side to side, up and down longitudinal play in every single one of the push pin oyster style links, and the cumulative effect of that is across the length of the bracelet is it rattles. It's a sloppy bracelet. Let's check the other side for continuity. Again, we have the same problem. Sloppy. It's a sloppy bracelet which rattles, and it rattles on wrist, simply down to it having poor tolerances. The holes are too large and the pins are undersized, and therefore we don't get an interference friction fit. What we get is a sloppy fit with the tolerances too large, and it rattles. So on a positive note, because of the excess play, of course it does not feel stiff, it doesn't kink. The links articulate freely. Let's check the other side. As one would expect, articulates freely. The positive is it doesn't have any sharp edges to the top edge or the low edge of the flank, so they've been deburred and chamfered very well. The bracelet does not pull arm hairs, so it does feel comfortable. It doesn't pull arm hairs, doesn't have sharp edges. Brushed satin finishing is aesthetically pleasing. The mirror polishing is flawless. They just need to refine it with screw pins to tighten up the tolerances. This is the kind of play one would expect with a low tier piece which is Chinese made below €100. This does not say to me Swiss made €870 mid tier level. This does not say a brand with 101 years of heritage. It's not a Swiss made quality bracelet. Let's look at the clasp. Now, again, I'm going to be critical as I've detailed. 4 micro adjustment holes, light gauge, wholly unacceptable. On a positive note, there's no sharp edge to the top edge or the low edge of the body, and it's been deburred and chamfered to the undercut, to the flanks very well, so it doesn't have any sharp corners, doesn't have any sharp edges. Flip block is mirror polished to a good standard. Let's look at the interior. Solid mill 316L grade stainless steel, as one would expect. Doesn't have sharp corners to the centre section, which is good. Top side, underside and flanks are brushed satin finish to a good standard, beautiful lustre, no sharp edges to the top edge or the lower edge of the flanks. But they've made a mistake, which is glaring. They've engraved stainless steel upside down on the right hand portion. So I'm going to clarify why I say it's upside down. The majority of collectors wear their pieces on their left wrist, and when they take the watch off, they rotate it like so, and then they open the flip block like so, like this. And so this is the right way up for reading it, for left-handed collectors, the majority of collectors. But if you look at the right-hand portion, you can see stainless steel is engraved upside down. They need to invert this, because you don't take off the wrist, you don't take the watch off the wrist and rotate the clasp upside down, do you? So this is upside down. They simply need to invert it. They need to engrave stainless steel the right way up. Now, let's check the hinge pins. Left hand hinge pin has excessive longitudinal, lateral, side to side, up and down play. Play in every single direction. Just bear with me, I'll move the flip block out of the way, put my glove behind because I want to focus the camera and show it to you. As you can see, it rattles. This is the kind of play one would expect on a €100 bracelet. Low tier piece, made in China, not Swiss made, not €870 in the mid tier. Let's check the centre one. Again, lateral, side to side, just bear with me, I'll put my glove behind it, I want you to see this. Lateral, side to side, up and down, longitudinal play. This is €100 low tier Chinese made level. This is not Swiss made, €870 mid tier level. Finally, let's check the right hand hinge pin. Lateral, side to side, up and down, longitudinal play. Play in every single direction. This is wholly unacceptable. So this is a disgrace to Grovana. This is a brand which was founded in 1924, 101 years ago. They've got 101 years of pedigree and heritage, and this is the kind of solid mill class they're producing 101 years later. Wholly unacceptable. If this were below €100 and Chinese made, I would be magnanimous about it and say, well, it's to be expected. One has to expect some cost-cutting measures. But with a Swiss-made piece, which is €870 in the mid-tier, it needs quality control, refinement, build quality. It needs tolerances that are tight. Left, centre, right-hand hinge pins must be tight. This is wholly unacceptable. Poor quality bracelet, poor quality clasp, which is disappointing. Now, unfortunately, that's not the only negative. Pressed stainless steel diver's extension link. This is 2025. This kind of pressed diver's extension link was acceptable in the early 2000s, not in 2025. They haven't even mirror polished it. It's brushed satin finished. This is a cost-cutting measure too far. Very light gauge of pressed stainless steel to the diver's extension, and needless to say, we have excess play. Look at the amount of play. Dreadful. This is an absolute disgrace to a Swiss brand which is 101 years old. Lateral, longitudinal, side to side, up and down play. We're not looking at a €100 low tier Chinese watch from AliExpress here. This is a Swiss made piece made in Tenneken in Switzerland. Look at the centre hinge pin of the diver's extension link. Lateral, longitudinal, side to side, up and down play. This is below €100 price point level finishing, build quality, quality control. Now on a positive note, it does snap into the body with a nice positive click, and it does deploy with a nice positive click, but it's just dreadful, disappointing. This does not say to me Swiss made €870. This says to me below €100 Chinese made AliExpress level. Let's look at the case back. Solid 316L grade stainless steel case back, concentric CNC lathe tool machined, and we've got flutes on it, as you can see, and the fluted teeth are deburred and chamfered to a good standard and also mirror polished. So we've got squares which are milled into the stainless steel case back for screwing it and unscrewing it. It does look very aesthetically pleasing. Now, the squares are deburred and chamfered very well, so they don't have any sharp edges. The engraving around the circumference with the specification is high definition and crisp, doesn't have any sharp edges, so they've deburred and polished the engraving very well. And in the centre we have the Grovana emblem and Grovana logo with Swiss made since 1924. So engraving is sharp, it's crisp, doesn't feel sharp, doesn't feel rough, and the concentric CNC lathe tool machining is very good quality. Nice flat profile to it, so it doesn't add significant thickness. Even though it's 300 metres, we're not looking at a 200 metre caseback. This caseback provides an effective hermetic seal to 300, which is strong specification. So nice and flat. I'm pleased to see they didn't use a bubble back profile to the caseback, which would have increased the thickness to beyond 12.9. So caseback is good. Female pivoted end links are a good snug fit to the head of the piece, and we've got standard spring bars, which is acceptable. The underside to the head of the piece is mirror polished to a flawless standard. No sharp edges to the flanks, they've deburred and chamfered it very well. The tips of the lugs have large chamfers which delete the sharp corners, so the quality of the finishing is excellent to the head of the piece. Right, so I'll give you a wrist shot and you can see how it fits on my 8-inch wrist. Now, I haven't sized the bracelet, but I want you to be aware. I'm on position 2 of 4 of the micro adjustments, so that has slightly shortened it, but I can still slide an index finger beneath the bracelet and clasp at all times. So this bracelet will actually fit up to a 9-inch wrist size, because I could even fit up to an 8.5-inch wrist size with it on position 2 of the 4. On the maximum position 4 of 4, this will fit up to a 9-inch wrist. So there's plenty of links in the bracelet if you are a collector with a larger wrist of over 8 inches. It will fit up to a maximum 9 inches. The minimum size it will support is 6 inches. There are enough removable links on the 6 o'clock side and the 12 o'clock side to size the bracelet down to 6. So 6 inches up to 9, they are the minimum and maximum sizes. So as I've detailed, there are 2 negatives to this piece. The long lug to lug. It's clearly intended for collectors with a larger wrist because it's a 42mm piece. We're not looking at a 39 or a 40, so one has to bear that in mind. But it does have a long lug to lug. You'll know from my previous reviews, 48 is the sweet spot for lug to lug. That is the perfect sweet spot lug to lug because it fits collectors with a 6 to 7 inch wrist or a 7 to 8 inch wrist respectively. At 50.2, this is 2.2mm too long. They should shorten it down to 48. The problem with this is, and the same applies to the Ocean 142, which is the same case. Look at the large gap beneath the tips of the lugs. The Ocean 142 had this problem, and it's often the reason why collectors would purchase a piece and then after a short period of time become disenchanted with it and sell the piece because they just could not get on with the flat lugs. Because as you can see, there is a large gap beneath the tips of the lugs. The undercut to the flanks of the case also has a large gap. Now, it doesn't have a bubble back case back, so it's caused by the low profile lugs being very flat, the low profile head of the piece being very flat. The lugs are straight, they do not curve and wrap around the wrist as per a tonneau case or as per, for example, the Submariner Dates 16610 classic case, which this is an homage to. The lugs are very straight, so one gets this large gap. Now, this is again why they've made the error with the female pivoted end links, because you can see the large gap you get beneath the end link in the bracelet because this rectangle in the centre of the female pivoted end link cannot articulate. They haven't removed enough meat, enough metal from the edge of the rectangle to allow it to pivot. There's not enough clearance. It's catching on the end link. So they need to machine more stainless steel off the edge of it, or alternatively they need to mill more stainless steel out of the end link itself. That would allow the centre, this rectangle section, to articulate. It could pivot as per a Black Bay 41 Heritage or a Black Bay 58. So it really negates this having female pivoted end links because they don't move the same. It really looks like a male end link in terms of its articulation. So we get this large gap. So the problem is it sits on top of the wrist like a slab of 316L grade stainless steel. It doesn't wrap around the wrist like a tonneau case or a curved lug dive piece. So same applies to the Ocean 142, which is the same case. The lugs are flat, they're very straight, and of course the end link doesn't articulate enough. As you can see, the oyster style bracelet doesn't pivot. So it's a shame. Very easy to correct, but they haven't done it. And again, one could be magnanimous about this if this were a €100 low-tier piece from China, but this is a Swiss-made piece, and we're looking at €870 here. So clearly intended for larger wrists because of the long lug to lug of 50.2, and of course at 42 it does wear with wrist presence. Now, the main negative of this piece, the main error they've made, is the taper of the bracelet. 22 to 20 is too much meat on the bracelet, and the clasp is too light gauge, it's very light. So what we've got here is a top heavy piece, because it's large, 42 by 50.2. Then we've got a very meaty bracelet, 22 down to 20, so there's a lot of meat on the bracelet, but a very light gauge clasp. So the clasp feels too light, bracelet feels too heavy, head of the piece is very large with wrist presence. So they can correct this very simply. 20 to 16 is the industry standard for 39 and 40mm head of the pieces. Now, of course, a 20 to 16 wouldn't look appropriate for 42 because 42 is large. 22 to 18 is the alternative industry standard for good reason, because 20 to 16 gives a nice taper. 22 to 18 also gives a nice taper for larger pieces like this. So this has 2mm of meat too much. It tapers from 22 down to 20. It only tapers 2mm across the length of the bracelet. It needs to taper 4mm from 22 down to 22 down to 18. And that would reduce a lot of the meat. Now, the problem is, this is a very heavy piece. It's 186 grams. It's a very heavy piece, even for 42. Now, one has to be realistic. This is a 42, not a 39 or a 40. So it should be in excess of 150. I would expect this to be circa 160 to 165 grams with all the links in an oyster-style bracelet. But with a very light clasp, this should only be 160 to a maximum of 165. At 186, it feels very heavy. The problem is it reduces the comfort level and the feel-good factor. It feels top-heavy, doesn't feel balanced, feels like too much weight on the wrist to be comfortable to wear for long periods of time, such as 8 to 12 hours per day. So they simply need to reduce the taper from 22 down to 20. They need to reduce it to 22 down to 18. That would reduce the meat on the bracelet and also update the clasp. That will balance the piece better. It would mean that it feels balanced rather than top heavy. So comfort level is poor, feel good factor is poor, and it's largely down to the bracelet and also the clasp being too light. Right, so let's do a Lume test and we'll see how the Lume performs when it's charged up to the absolute maximum. So this uses C1 Super Luminova. Right, so that's now fully charged, and as you can see, it has not disappointed. We're clearly looking at 5 to 6 layers of C1. So C1 has a slightly lighter tone than C3, which is one of my personal favourites. You'll know that from my previous reviews. I like BGW9 and I also like C3 because C3 has a green tone like tritium. C1 has a whiter exciter, more like X1 in the Super Luminova. So the C1 glows brighter white green rather than C3, which has a darker green tone to it. Now, in terms of colour tone match, in daylight there's a good colour tone match between the Lume pip on the aluminium bezel insert, the applied indices and the Mercedes handset. They all look white rather than being cream or off-white. So, in the dark, there's also a good colour tone match. The Lume pip is glowing brightly in the same green tone as the applied indices and also the Mercedes handset. Now, one could say the exciter in the indices is slightly whiter, so it looks like there's more layers of C1 applied on the indices versus the Lume pip and the Mercedes handset, but we're clearly looking at a minimum of 5 to 6 on the Lume pip, the dial and the hands, which is good. Exciter's continuing to glow for a good length of time. It's not fading quickly, which is good. Had they used the cost-cutting measure of 3 to 4 layers of C1, this would now begin to fade quickly, but it's not. It's holding its charge, so that's good. So 5 to 6 layers, which is the industry standard, it's optimum. Now, as I've detailed, they could enhance this and improve the legibility if they scaled up the proportions of the applied indices and the Mercedes handset to Rolex Maxi dial proportions for the indices, and also increase the size of the Mercedes handset to better match larger indices, because I think the indices and the handset, they look the right size for a 39 or a 40mm piece, but 42 has a larger dial, and therefore the indices look slightly undersized, and also the Mercedes handset looks slightly undersized. For example, on the Steinhardt Ocean 1 42, that has a larger Mercedes handset, and the benefit of that is, of course, there's a larger plot, so a larger area for the BGW9 superluminova to be applied. They use BGW9 on the Ocean 142. But the green tone of the C1 is aesthetically pleasing, does look like tritium, which was then discontinued due to its radioactivity and succeeded by luminova, and then luminova was succeeded by superluminova respectively. I like the green tone of it. Looks similar to C3 but slightly whiter, as I've detailed, because of the C1 looks more like X1 with the exciter being whiter. So it's good. Good performance, no cost-cutting measures, and it's not fading. So they deserve credit. No cost-cutting measures with the superluminova. Right, so let's discuss the movement use. So as I've detailed, originally Grovana used the ETA 2824-1 for the Key West and also for the Ocean 142, which they made for Steinhardt, and then supply of the ETA movements dried up because ETA began to restrict supply to non-Swatch Group brands such as Grovana, and they had to switch over to using the SW200-1. So originally the Key West said 25 joules on the dial, denoting the ETA 2824-2. It now says 26 joules, which is correct because it uses the SW200-1. It has 26 joules, it runs at 28,800 vibrations per hour and a frequency of 4 Hz. Has hand winding and hacking, which use for complications, and they work correctly. Quick set date complication is good, also works correctly as I've demonstrated. 41 hour power reserve is perfectly acceptable. The standard grade of SW200-1 has a stated accuracy of ±12 to ±30 seconds per day, so a rather wide accuracy range. However, I'm pleased to report that Grovana are doing a good job of regulating the SW200-1s they're using. This one is running consistently at +5 seconds per day when it's fully wound to its maximum 41 hour power reserve. So +5 is actually within chronometer grade accuracy or top grade accuracy, regulated in 5 positions, and that's between -4 and +6. So +5 is good, that's top grade or chronometer grade accuracy, and +5 is certainly within the stated ±12 to ±30 of the standard grade. No negatives to the SW200-1 whatsoever. It's a reliable, well-proven workhorse Swiss calibre. It's been in service since 2012, so at this stage in 2025 it is well proven. It's reliable, builds quality, quality control, materials and finishing are all very good. Standard grade is acceptable, although at this price point I would prefer to see chronometer grade or top grade, but however standard or elabor grade is acceptable at the €870 price point. So last I'll summarise the piece. What do I think of it overall? Well, when I'm considering reviewing a watch on my channel, the watch should meet 2 criteria. It should be both excellent quality and excellent value at the respective price point. So difficult piece to weigh up because mid-tier piece, price point is 809 Swiss francs or $870 or €870. The reason why I say it's a difficult piece to weigh up because what we're looking at is a good quality head of the piece on a poor quality bracelet and clasp, as you can see. One can be magnanimous about a sloppy bracelet and a poor quality clasp with an abhorrent pressed diver's extension, as I've detailed, if this were a low tier Chinese made piece below €100 from AliExpress, but we're not looking at that. We're looking at a mid-tier piece made in Tenneken in Switzerland by a brand with 101 years of heritage. So wholly unacceptable. So poor quality bracelet on a good quality head of the piece. In terms of evaluating it, I compare it head to head with this Steinhardt Ocean 142, which is now made by Palladium AG, because that is very similar in terms of proportion, specification, etc., but it's significantly less expensive. It's €490. That is the current retail price in 2025. So this is €870. The Ocean 142 is €490. Massive price difference, but they both use the same standard grade of SW200-1. So I'm going to declare it okay quality, but I'm going to declare it poor value because in order for it to be good quality and excellent quality, they need to update the bezel to 120 clicks, they need to enhance the Cyclops magnifier to 2.5 times, and also they need to change the bracelet from 22 to 20, they need to refine the taper from 22 down to 18, screw pins rather than push pins, and they also need to update the clasp to a micro adjustment clasp or alternatively heavier gauge with 5 or 6 micro adjustment holes, and delete the pressed stainless steel diver's extension link. It should be solid and milled in the absence of a micro adjustment mechanism. So clasp needs to be updated, bracelet needs to be updated because it's sloppy, push pins are unacceptable at this price point, and also they need to refine the female Bezel end links, because as you can see, they don't articulate. It's like having a set of male end links. So this negates the purpose of having female Bezel end links. They don't pivot. So too many cost-cutting measures, too many areas that need refinement for me to declare it good quality or excellent quality at €870. It's okay. The head of the piece is good. Bracelet is poor. Overall, it's okay. Value is poor. This is not €870. This does not say to me Swiss made from a brand with 101 years of pedigree and heritage since 1924. They just need to update it. This was acceptable in the early 2000s when they made the Ocean 142, but in 2025 it's not acceptable. So I'm going to recommend it to you for consideration. I hope you've enjoyed my review of the Grovana Key Rest. Please feel free to post your own comments below the video. Thank you for watching.